How's it going, guys? We are on week 5 through 6 doing our next vlog. Our discussion guidelines are critical analysis on the resurgence of school segregation. So I got really excited just upon reading the title of this article written by Joyce Kuo, if I'm saying her name correctly. Excluded, Segregated, and Forgotten, a historical view of the discrimination of Chinese Americans in public schools. So I was really excited to see this because we don't see too much of other minority struggles. So it's actually nice to see an article coming from the Chinese community and what their contribution to public schooling was. So the purpose of this article is really to kind of dispel and bring clarity to the idea that Chinese Americans were not victims of discrimination systemically in public schools in America from mid-1800s to the mid-1900s. California, specifically San Francisco, because a lot of the Chinese immigrants ended up residing in San Francisco, creating a highly dense and highly populated community within the area. So Congress actually enacted their own immigration restrictions, and this was in response to a lot of anti-Chinese aggression that was, starting to bring awareness to. So Congress started by modifying the original terms of the Burlingame Treaty of 1868, and it's funny because this treaty was actually originally created to protect the Chinese from discrimination, right? And then this treaty was then manipulated to enact and restrict the amount of Chinese immigrants coming into this country. So, and this took place in the time period from 1868 to 1882. So what's really crazy is just a couple, maybe 2 decades ago, about 20 years prior to that, around the 1850s, Chinese immigrants were heavily, coming into the U.S., and they were really tolerated due to their manpower and their huge help in building the continuous growth of the United States, specifically in the railroad systems. So what's funny is these same immigrants who, were such a big part of the workforce in helping America grow became viewed as a threat during the economic recession in the 1870s, and it was quickly flipped to, they're taking our jobs, there's too many of them, they're out here to get us. So it's crazy how they were used and just in such a short time period after quickly discriminated, and acts and laws were created to oppose. So these acts and laws that were being made was quickly, manipulating the public, right, and the press as well too, who looked at Chinese and would make statements that the Chinese are essentially, I quote, transients whose loyalties remained with China and who are intended to return there. So this became filter fed to the citizens of the United States, and then it was not short after in which Chinese people were excluded from land ownership, voting, access to courts, employment, interracial marriages, and naturalization. The Chinese were even viewed as foreigners regardless of their intent to stay. So they automatically begin to isolate them, begin to restrict them, begin to limit them. And, this could really have, strong effects on a community. We're not even discussing the public schooling yet, which is crazy. So in 1855, California actually was a little slick with it. They had ignored the explicit mention of race. The intent of the legislature is to exclude non-whites from the system was evident in 1855 school law, which explicitly referred to white children. So they didn't mention that other races couldn't go, but they specifically said that the education was catered to white children. So the legislature went even further, officially passing a new school law in 1860, which segregated specific minority groups, including children of Black, Chinese, and Indian descent, into separate schools. All right. By 1870, the preconceived notion into incorporating the Chinese immigrants into America was to Americanize the Chinaman, right? So even then, that was dropped, and it turned into a complete rejection of that, right? So systemic discrimination became so prominent that in 1870 and 1872, the legislature revised the 1860 school code so that Chinese American children could not even attend separate schools. So there's actually, a a 14-year period where the Chinese were explicitly excluded from all white and even separate schools in any public schooling system. So for about 14 years, not only were they pushed away, from integrated schools, they were pushed away from segregated schools and not allowed to practice public schooling. So this forced the Chinese community into a difficult situation by which they had two options. One, to, rebel and fight against the board and try to bring this back, or two, for those who didn't want to rebel and, were afraid of losing everything they had come and built, they would actually seek other opportunities of private education, which was, it was definitely getting the job done, but it wasn't an outlet for everybody at all. Upon completing this reading, I'm definitely much more knowledgeable about various perspectives and controversial issues relating to education based on the discrimination faced by Chinese Americans, along with all people of color in the mid-1800s. This reading also really shed light about how the issues of race, ethnicity, language, and culture are interwoven with schools based on the emphasis America put on educating the Caucasian children only. Outside of direct discriminatory policies, there's still, till this day, it was implemented hundreds of years ago, and to this day we could still find it implemented, to where there's a focus and a cater towards Caucasian children, right? And in the education system, to where being almost secondhand becomes normalized and accepted, right? So we're in the process of tearing down all these walls and bringing it down, and this article really helped shed light about how deep these roots are. This created an uphill battle for the Chinese community and all minorities living in America, which definitely affects each passing generation to this day.